I like reading, but sometimes reading breaks, and there's the crack. And I'm just sitting there thinking about, wondering what's going on. Or I think I'm thinking about wondering what's going on. But I don't think that's thinking. It might be what the scientists meant by remembering, but in the other sense. Maybe there are two meanings to the word remembering. I'm talking about the fast one, the shadow falling across your mind. It happens so fast. I don't know. And remembering in the other sense, the long one, the dwelling one. I think we all know that, the remembering. It becomes a jumble. I can't make sense of it. It's just pictures or something like pictures, jumbling. Sometimes a whole story, except the parts are all mixed up, and I don't know which part comes first. Sometimes it's begin at the end. Sometimes it's begin in the middle. Sometimes I can see it all perfectly, just like it was true. My name is Robert Ashley. I'm here at Roulette because we're doing a recent opera of mine called The Old Man Lives in Concrete. It attempts to be the kinds of thoughts and the kinds of thinking and the sequencing of thoughts of an old man who spends a lot of time alone. We've been putting this opera together now for the last 7 years. This is the third series of performances, and the total time of the opera would be something like 10 hours, and that's, I guess, approximately the time that an old person like that would spend alone. Somebody might take care of him in the morning or take care of her in the morning, and then 10 or 11 hours later, they might come back and take care of them again. So in effect, I'm trying to build up a number of scenes and longer songs that are sort of portraits of the kind of thing that I imagine would go through this old person's mind.
Everybody has these things. They happen all the time, but nobody pays attention. The nobody pays attention is probably an instinct for self-preservation, learned over generations and generations, because you have to be cautious about what's supposed to get your attention. Look out the window, gaze for a few minutes. There's the sky and a building a quarter of a mile away. In the pure blue light of that sky, and into the frame of that sky and building, a small plane appears. The plane flies directly into the building. It flies directly into the building. But there is no collision. The image of the plane flies into the image of the building. It's easy to say to yourself that the plane is flying behind the building, but it doesn't look that way. It looks like the plane is flying directly into the building. It never ceases to be amazing. And out of the same window, watching the weather move in the direction of the northeast, the same window where the little planes fly into the building and never reappear, There is also watching the weather move to the northeast. It's just a fact of meteorology. Happens all the time, but it's beautiful, and it gets your attention. You can wonder always about the meaning. I guess the meaning is what you wonder about.
For instance, plot is always a burden. It doesn't happen that way, but we burden our stories with it, mainly in the writing of the stories, less in the telling. In an earlier time, when there were not so many people, some stories had a plot. The examples can be named. The examples are translated every few years now. Anyone interested buys the new translation. It gets praised in comparison to the previous translations. Anyone interested buys the new translation, but nobody reads it. One of the earliest stories, one of the first ones as we know it, just a bunch of men camping out and trying to hurt each other. This one is mad at that one. He sulks in his tent because that one took his girlfriend. Just foolishness from a woman's point of view. Then that story gets imitated. And in recent times, a certain literature with a plot, this part is known, becomes so bloated that nobody reads it, any more than they read the story the first time. So now we have a dreadful poetry of personal experience. This happened to me, believe it or not. Not really get your name in the paper poetry, though that gets to be a part of it, if anybody reads the poetry thinking to become a poet themselves, but basically just trying to figure out how the words work. They are strung together in some rhythm, but bringing with them their meaning. And so throwing those meanings together in unreal ways causes nightmares. I moved this word around, I moved that word around. I tried out a different kind of punctuation, trying to make it sound like someone speaking, but not successfully. It was a wild and reckless challenge, trying to pull what they had, what they felt for each other, out of the dust of his fears and cautious behavior. It made him, if anything, worse. He wanted to visit her after she and her family had moved to a town nearby. She said, "I like it here," speaking about the library, because it is quiet and peaceful. So after his revelation, she writes, saying, "I don't appreciate that at all," with no return address.
Well, I discovered in thinking about this subject that I had personally known quite a few people who did really extraordinary things. I mean, things of extraordinary bravery, things of maybe not quite legal things. I mean, but people who had really done extraordinary things, and they had no desire at all for any sort of fame. They didn't even want people to know they had done it. And that's sort of interesting to me, because that doesn't match with what we think. We think so much these days in terms of celebrity, and if you do the smallest thing, you should win the Nobel Prize for it. And we put aside these remarkable people who are happily unknown.
Washed and dressed and ready for fun, says, after breakfast, why don't we stroll a few blocks to see Princess Di, to be Her Royal Highness someday maybe, or just another footnote to the history we don't want to know. Or maybe she'll get tired of this stuff and decide to be something else. Either way, we know now you gotta go sometime. And it's gonna be because somebody made a mistake. That's the way you go, always. When I speak of a friend who went, doctor says misdiagnosis. Somebody made a mistake, as if. Washed and dressed and ready for fun, WDRF, and eternal vigilance, EV. And can you do this by yourself, CYD, TBY, and I, the unnameable you, stroll a few blocks to see Princess die. Gonna bless an autoimmune deficiency syndrome, AIDS hospital. Careful to kiss each and every patient, because nothing could be worse than kissing that moron she is married to, the prince of whatever, and you gotta go sometime as above. But she did her job, you know. 2 kids, Jesus. Maybe one of them can come in out of the rain. And that bitch, the queen, pissed because the queen bomb is going to live to 150, with all that running to catch the kids before they fall off the carriage. A small crowd is gathering, 3 college-age type girls in olive drab trench coats, undistinguished, but here to see Princess die makes you wonder. But what the heck, this is England, right?
Reliable knew after reading of the flash flood and the death of the woman and the boy that he had accepted a peculiar responsibility. He accepted that he should have been there to watch over the old woman and the boy. How do you come to know and understand such a fact? What kind of mind or meditation teaches you? And what do you do to your life to accept that fact? We're in the present now. Pause. In the present now, Reliable has a sense of helplessness watching TV. And he has a sense of helplessness and then anger about the television business itself. You call the television company about a technical problem, you get an automated answer. Follow these directions, answer yes or no. The responsibility for the problem is shifted from the television company to the person who calls. Everybody knows this. Reliable finally got a real person on the service call. He said he was going to kill somebody because of the way he was being treated. So the police came, and Reliable said yes. He had said he was going to kill somebody, but that was only to get some attention, which is what he got with the police and all. The television company doesn't want to press charges. Reliable doesn't know anything about the history of the behavior in the people around him. He just does what he believes is necessary. I learned a lot from Reliable. I couldn't be like Reliable. Very few people could be like Reliable. We had many talks all night with a bottle of whiskey. He was interesting to talk to in the way that only some people are interesting to talk to. Reliable told me about a dream he had. For Reliable, the dream explained everything. In the dream, he's on some sort of meeting grounds with rolling hills, once very lush, like meeting grounds in dreams are supposed to be. But now the meeting grounds are shabby because the people who go there don't take care of what they've been given. Reliable is dreaming. One afternoon, an artist he knows only in the dream makes some sort of art thing to be shown someplace. Reliable doesn't care much for artists or what they do, but the artist had borrowed his car for the art thing. The art thing is a preachy sort of piece, a lesson about how to meet things and control them with goodwill. It is one of those ideas from another time. So he doesn't have his car. He's wandering around. He finds a restaurant in the middle of the nowhere of the dream. He goes in the restaurant. He knows he doesn't want to eat the food the restaurant is serving. He doesn't want to eat the food because of the smell. The waiter takes him to a small table in a place so clumsy that the waiter has to climb under the table to get the order. Reliable orders a whiskey. While he's waiting, a man sits down opposite him. and puts the remains of his meal in front of Reliable, in front of where his whiskey will be when he is served. The remains of the man's meal contains large chunks of meat. The man just dumps it on the table in front of Reliable. Then there's a dog from someplace, a little dog. The dog gets on the table and starts eating the chunks of meat. Reliable pushes the dog off the table and calls the waiter to make the man go away. Then he hears somebody say, "Why can't you take anything without making a scene? Why can't you have some humor? Try to change the world by example." This is what Reliable thinks of as the song of his life. He can't walk away from things that make a confrontation. He has to take the confrontation. This is why he throws the carry-on baggage into the aisle and the flight attendant has to intercede to present a fight. Reliable doesn't like to fight, but he can't see how to handle things like that in a different way from how he does.
Well, I was very fortunate, and it probably shaped my ideas a lot. That when I was 50 years younger, when I was in my early 30s, I got to work with a group of people, small group of people, who were extremely articulate and good speakers. They weren't musicians, for the most part. They weren't musicians, but they were interested in these kinds of new kinds of narrative forms. And so I was fortunate. I did 5 big pieces for them, operas. And then I sort of got discouraged because there was no support. And I got out of it for a few years, about 7 years. I just figured I wasn't going to do it anymore. I don't want to get into the whole history of the thing, but the politics of American television for a decade in the 1970s looked very promising to me. It looked promising for my work, and it looked like it might turn into something that would be very good for American opera. I mean, that is to say, opera for television looked like a spectacular, successful marriage. And so I started working with that in mind. I made two big operas for television a long time ago, and 3 half-hour operas for television. And then I got to a situation where I had to be either a television producer or a musician, and I wanted to be a musician more. So ever since that point, in the middle 1980s, 25 years ago, I started composing these stories as if they were going to go to television, as if television was a possibility. And I still think that's true. I mean, not particularly for my pieces, but I still think that is some form of that. Now we're talking about the internet and that kind of thing, but some form of that is a good possible situation for young composers. I think that anything else, like grand opera, stage opera, that kind of thing, the chances are pathetic, hopeless, and not so interesting anyway. I read recently that a scientist says now that thinking and remembering are the same. It's just a matter of timing. We just thought they were different. Remembering, I guess, is supposed to be faster than thinking in a physiological sense. God, those guys are weird. Of course they're the same. Everybody knows that. Try it for yourself. But even if thinking and remembering have the same thing happening in your brain, they seem different. That's important. But that's not the point. What's interesting is, and I learned this from the article, the synapse, you know about synapses, is chemical. And I deduced this myself. Because the synapse is chemical, not electrical, not at the speed of light, there must be an ever so slight accumulated delay for every thought. And when you think about how many times that has to happen in a day, for instance, in the billions apparently, then the notion of the delay seems right. We would have evolved that way. The delay is between what has formed as a thought and is waiting in the wings, to use a phrase, to be played out in the mind, next, as it were, and whatever is actually thought, whatever it is that engages your mind totally, as in thinking while turning the double play at second base, choosing which soap to buy, choosing among words and how to order them. Whatever it is that engages your mind totally causes you simply not to exist self-consciously. A kind of hole in the time of who you are. The preformed thought is simply a cause next in order to do the active work of thinking. In other words, thinking, as we understand it, is never, ever in real time, to use a phrase. When you think that you are thinking, are aware of it, you are actually, I'm sorry, remembering. Maybe that's remembering with a different meaning, but there's no other word. A formulation often of unimagined origins. A plan, I call it that, to be enacted in the synapses as soon as possible. You are carrying out a thought. You could call it, the formulation, a cause of thinking. A cause of the activity of thinking. A cause in the sense that it's functional, that you got just a moment or so ago. But it's still just a formulation, remember? You could call it, whatever it is to be thought, a topology of sorts. In the what's up next notion of ideas. And every idea would have a topology. Imagine a kind of two-dimensional form, a kind of blanket or membrane that spreads across your brain or across parts of your brain for just a moment or two, waiting its turn to be the next thought. This, of course, is sort of disheartening. The idea that we are never, or at least rarely, thinking in real time. On the other hand, maybe the crack, whatever is happening in the crack, the seeming shadow falling across the brain, is truly thinking. And the rest is just remembering. I don't know. I live in that place, remembering, but I don't know. Some of you will understand what I'm talking about. You will understand when I say to stay away from remembering. It's painful, it hurts, somewhere in your mind or wherever things hurt. Stay away from remembering. Avoid remembering. I go to the other side of the street when I see it coming. The crack, if that's where you feel the difference between thinking and remembering, the crack might set us apart in some way. It might be what is called consciousness. And in another way, it could be a physiological explanation of déjà vu. Patterns imposed on the brain and retained as in storage. A physiological explanation of déjà vu. I can't imagine, personally, I can't imagine my work in the company of like 2,000 or 3,000 people, because I think it's intentionally more intimate than that, and I'm not interested in it being otherwise. I'm Robert Ashley, and you're watching Roulette TV. Thank you. Okay, kids.